You want me to start letting people in?
I got it. I got so entranced by that space bar but it's messing me up.
That stinks.
Yeah, I'm letting people in right now.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's extremely powerful Diversability Unplugged, Disability and Gender-Based Violence and Intimate Partner Violence. Before we dive into our panel, I want to give everyone some time to join by describing the image that's on your screen. It's a cream background with navy text. At the top is a teal gradient header with white text that reads, "Please keep microphones muted throughout the event." Below that are the words Diversability Unplugged, Disability and Gender-Based Violence and Intimate Partner Violence, which is above 4 round pictures of our panelists, starting from left to right. Lala Shanks, she, he, they, community engaged artist and cultural organizer. Rachel Uninger, she, her, drafter and professional artist. Tova Fine, she, they, artist and activist. And Karen Willison, she, her, founder and editor-in-chief of the Ability Toolbox. Beneath the pictures to the left is a navy banner with white font that reads Moderator Marie Dagenet Lewis, she, her, Operations Manager, Diversability, and it has a round picture to the right of it. Right aligned at the bottom are the words, "Join our online communities, the Diversability Leadership Collective, https://diversability.mn.co. And fun fact, you can join now and get your first week free. Centered near the bottom are 2 logos, a Navy Diversability one and a Black Interpreter Now one. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Marie Dagenet Lewis, and I'm a pale-skinned woman with long black and purple hair wearing a gray shirt. And I have the honor of being the operations manager at Diversability, where our entirely disabled team works together to ensure that we are elevating disabled pride together through community and conversation. I feel compelled to preface tonight's talk with a trigger warning. We are all survivors of abuse who have come together to share our stories in hopes of shining light on what abuse towards disabled people looks like to help prevent the cycles of it continuing. We thank our courageous panel for coming tonight and bearing their souls with us, as it's conversations like these that really help save lives. At any time, if you need to turn off your camera, stop talking, ask for more time, anything that can help make you feel comfortable, please let us know, and please feel free to do so. Now we'll dive in. There is a terrifying truth that doesn't get nearly enough attention. People with disabilities are at greater risk of experiencing violence. Gender-based violence and intimate partner violence can happen to anyone regardless of their gender or sex, and it shows itself in a variety of ways, which is why tonight our panelists are going to help shine some light on that. We're going to begin with introductions, and Lala, I would love if we could start with you. Please give us a quick introduction of yourself, starting with a visual description.
Hi, everybody. This is Lala speaking. I am a biracial Black and white person with light tan skin. I have dyed red hair with dark brown roots. I also have a black headband on, black glasses. I'm wearing small hoop earrings and a gold chain necklace. And behind me is my messy bedroom. I'm also wearing a green striped sweater. And a bit about me, I am a community engaged artist. I use so many different words to describe the work that I do. I'm a storyteller and artivist, which is the combination of activist and artist. And I just love to do work that pours back into my community because my community pours so much into me. And I'm happy to talk more about myself as we move through the conversation. Very excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Lala. And I first heard the word artivist from you, and I love that term so much. Next, we'll go to another artist activist, Tova. If you don't mind giving your introduction and visual description, please.
Hey all, I'm Tova. I'm a white Jewish person with long brown hair and brown bangs, and I have large tortoiseshell glasses. I have a bunch of plants behind me, obviously, and about me, I am an artist. I'm also, I guess I've been called this too, an artivist. I used to do photography, but now I do more illustration. And I also am a disability and rape survivor advocate. So I speak about my lived experience for the most part, and the lived experience of others, while respecting the lived experience of others more marginalized than myself.
Thank you for sharing. Next, we'll go to Rachel, who is also a disabled artist. We have so many artists on our panel today.
Hi all, my name is Rachel Unger. I'm a white queer woman with very short hair that's undercut and a black jacket and an intentionally blurry background. I'm a Bay Area local queer disabled artist, and I paint a lot about mutual care and disability sexuality as being uniquely hot. So yeah.
Thank you. And we'll go to Karen next. Karen, if you don't mind giving your introduction and visual description.
Hi, I'm Karen. I am a white woman. I have pale skin, long blonde hair, and I'm wearing a blouse that's teal with yellow flowers. And my background is kind of a tropical theme, like mid-century tropical, with a big cabinetry and then some parrots, wooden parrots, not real ones, hanging above me. And I am a survivor of an emotionally, financially abusive relationship, as well as a violent attack perpetrated by a caregiver and her boyfriend. And in my work, I've mostly worked in health and disability media, doing editing, writing. I cannot draw. My stick figure people are terrible, so I'm bringing the non-artist diversity to this panel. But I am a writer and an editor, and my current project is a website called The Ability Toolbox, and it's a community for people with all kinds of disabilities and mental health conditions to get support and share ideas.
I love it. And before we dive in, let me just say you are an artist. Writing is a form of art, storytelling in the form of
That is true, yes.
So you are in good company here. And you did touch a little bit about your experience. So I would love to start the first question with you, if that's okay. Gender-based and intimate partner violence towards the disabled looks different than what we stereotypically know abuse to be. So if you don't mind sharing, how did it show itself in your experience?
Well, I think what's different for me and for a lot of people is that a lot of times, first of all, it can be different people. It can be an intimate partner. It can also be a family member. For a lot of folks, it can be caregivers. Unfortunately, I've had a number of caregivers who were abusive in different ways. And so I think just looking beyond that, and also that although certainly there can be physical abuse, it's not always visible in the same kind of way, and that coercion and threats can be a big part of it, because we're much as I hate to say it, we're vulnerable in a certain way, especially like me. I'm a power wheelchair user, I need help with my daily tasks. And if the person that I'm relying on or who is in the home with me is, you know, is abusive and I'm relying on them, it's a very difficult situation to be in, both in terms of living in it and getting out of it. That's what I would say. That to me is what is different and unique about having a disability and experiencing intimate partner violence.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you brought up how it was hard for you to say, but we are vulnerable, but there's actually power in like embracing that vulnerability, because once you can like embrace it, then you have the power to kind of know and to hopefully make decisions to where you don't fall into those cycles. And so I would love to hand this over to Lala next, of how did gender-based violence and intimate partner violence show itself in your life? Because I know you also have the experience of being a non-binary person. So I would love to hear how that's really shown itself for you.
For sure, thank you. So something I'll name too is I'm multiply disabled, and it's funny, me and my friend slash roommate were saying earlier that it's like collecting Pokemon, my list of disabilities. Yeah, so that being said, being non-binary and multiply disabled and multi-marginalized, you know, as a racialized person, and the list can go on. I've really had to acknowledge this like perpetual state of survival I'm in, even when things are going the best they've ever gone. I'm still in this perpetual survival state as a person that is impacted by systems. And so as a non-binary person who presents in a way that is perceived as my assigned gender, I'm constantly having to advocate for being seen as who I actually am versus what box people are putting me in. And I think as a disabled person who has a lot of invisible disabilities, I'm in that boat as well. And with both of those things being named, I think a lot of the abuse I face is overt the word? Yeah, like overt, hidden. People won't see it because they also don't see me and my identities and the experiences I'm living. So when I name these intersections or my experiences as how I'm perceiving them, they often get taken away from me and reframed. And so the last thing I'll say to that point, I think, is just people forget that systems are abusive. Systemic oppression is a form of abuse, and medical abuse is abuse as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be like this long-term mutual relationship. Relationships where there are inherent power dynamics, such as seeking care from a medical professional, often makes us vulnerable to that sort of abuse as well. So that's the last thing I will say to that question. Beautiful question, by the way.
And that's such a powerful, powerful point, because when we think of abuse, we don't generally think of the systems really impacting us in that way, just because there's so much distance in between. But you are so right. And I saw Rachel really vibed with that part. So I'm going to hand it over to you next, Rachel, and then we'll go to Topa.
Yeah, multiple disabilities. Yes. Hi. I related. And medical abuse. I've had more medical abuse than I have had not medical abuse. It's absurd. People will tell me, go to the hospital, you've been in a car accident. And I'll be like, they literally don't provide me care at the hospital. Like, y'all don't understand. They won't even do an x-ray. So there's that. Answering the original question, one of the things that was the most different for me and harder to spot is I was abused by more than one intimate partner, which had nothing to do with their gender, because I date all the genders. I'm here for it. So yeah, but one of the people who was my abuser was also disabled. And what was really challenging is it didn't look the way it does on TV, even though it was physical. And so he would keep me up at night to help him with his mental health. And he would say, oh, but I would do the same for you. And the fact is he would. And so I did, but it didn't cost him what it cost me. To him, he was just tired. But for me, I had a chronic flare that would last days and days. And so my own body was causing more violence than if I had been hit by him. And he would never hit me. So that's why he didn't perceive himself as abusive. And so if your understanding of the situation is coming from the abuser, it's gonna mess it up too. And because my body is different, what is violent for my body doesn't look the same. And like, I wish doctors understood that too, because then they'd understand that declining to fill my prescription is violence. And all of that happens afterwards, that's worse. So yeah, like what is violent for people with disabilities is different. Mental health disabilities, physical disabilities, I don't care. Like it's just different kind of violence.
It really is. And I love just reframing violence as thinking of what brings my body discomfort, what brings me inevitable pain, what causes me to experience feelings that could have been prevented, could have been not experienced if somebody would have empathy, if somebody would have compassion. And I really do think that's such an important way to frame violence, because like you said, denying a prescription is violent. Making prescriptions financially inaccessible, that's violence. There's so much. And I think in conversations when we talk about violence, that's not what first comes to mind. So thank you so much for really touching upon that, because in an ableist society where there's way too much violence towards disabled people, that's so important to acknowledge. Tova, I would love to go to you next. How did gender-based or intimate partner violence really show itself in your life?
Hey, yes, mine was more like of a one, like I'd been sexually assaulted several times in my life. But there was one specific that was the worst out of all of them. I found that like I had complex trauma when I was younger, so it kind of led me to all of the wrong places, like wrong people, like just getting myself involved with unsafe scenarios because I was like looking for love in all the wrong places kind of thing. But yeah, my main experience where I think like disability came to play for me was being forced and unable to fight back because my strength was low. I couldn't run or get away in any way. So fighting back or running wasn't an option. So I just had to shut down, right, and let it happen. So yeah, like I internalized that for a long time, and that also I internalized it for about 10 years, and it bubbled up to the surface after a while finally. And yeah, it was really it was tough. But yeah, I'd say that.
And when you experience that, it's like you don't even want to admit to yourself sometimes that that's what happened, because it's just so hard. So I really feel that, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to start with you for our next question. What, like, knowing what you know now, looking back, what do you wish you knew then? And you're muted. Okay.
Oh yeah. I wish I had more love for myself. I wish that like I was suffering a lot with internalized ableism and like with my complex PTSD. So I found that I didn't yeah, I didn't have a lot of love or respect for myself or my body. So I wish I had more of that respect for myself. Like, I think that's like number one that pops up.
I really feel that, because it's like when that's one of the most amazing things about disability pride, because it starts to make you feel that sense of self-acceptance and self-love, to know you don't deserve to be in those situations. And so it really gave me chills when you said that was the thing that you wish you knew the most of, because it's true. When you feel comfortable in yourself, you won't even be in some of those situations. Karen, I would love to go to you next with this question. Looking back, what are some things you wish you knew then that you know now?
So in the relationship that was abusive, my spouse was a woman. And I mean, obviously I knew on some level that women could also be abusive, but it kind of didn't register to me. And also the different forms that abuse can take. And in that line, I wish that I had known the term coercive control and what it meant. If you have not heard this term before, after we are done today, please go look it up. You will be enlightened, and it will help you recognize, because I will say that I think almost everybody has experienced coercive control to some degree in their life from someone. And in some cases, you are able to get away from it. But if it ends up being in a close relationship, an intimate partner, a family member, someone that you depend on, then it can be very, very difficult to get out of it. And it can be very insidious, and it's not always recognized as the abuse that it is. And it can accompany physical violence, or it can be separate. But I have had people who went through serious physical violence tell me that the emotional abuse was worse. So, I mean, I can't speak for everybody on that, but I do think that it's very soul damaging to have someone who gets into you and actually changes the way you see yourself, and like makes you feel like you're worthless. And that takes a long time to come back from. It really does.
Mhm. I hear you. And just for anyone listening, a quick definition of coercive control, just because I think it's important to make sure that we are acknowledging everything with it. It refers to a pattern of behaviors that are used by an abuser to control their partner and create an uneven power dynamic. And it generally involves manipulation, intimidation to make a victim scared, isolated, and dependent on the abuser. And that is from some relationships in Australia website. But it's true that it's mind-blowing to how people can warp how we see ourselves. And emotional abuse, you'll never see a physical sign of it sometimes, but you're right, it's really damaging, and it's important that that gets the same acknowledgement of every type of abuse.
And I couldn't recognize it. Like, what it really took for me to recognize that I was being abused was when she started making physical threats. That I knew was abuse. I was like, oh, this is getting abusive. This is bad. But before that, it was still just as bad, but I couldn't see it. But it had to escalate to that before I could realize it.
Because that's one of the stereotypical forms of abuse that we acknowledge, because our society tells us that abuse is physical. So once we hear that physical aspect of it, but that's why it's important there's events like these, because it's not just physical. And I'm hoping that through sharing our experiences, we can help people start to see some of those red flags, or just feel some of those red flags before it can get to the point where there's just where it affects your soul like that. Rachel, I would love to go to you with this question next. Looking back, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
I wish I knew what boundaries were, because I was not raised in a household that had those, so I didn't know what they were at all. And I very much knew how to say, I don't like what you're doing. This isn't what I want. But if the other person screams back to you, oh, I'm the only one who's going to tell you the truth and your friends won't. Well, I didn't understand that was them trying to isolate me from my friends, them trying to gaslight my reality. I didn't understand what those things were. And I even if without understanding that, I understood what boundaries were. So I could say, I'm not going to talk to you if you talk to me that way, and just walk away, as like, there's going to be a consequence for you doing something that is outside of what I'm comfortable with. That part of boundaries. I was always good at being like, what are you doing? But the consequence part, I was never taught. And so that's useful, because it's even useful in relationships at work. And you're like, yo, I just cannot be here for you for this thing, but I can be here for that other thing. And then like, it's easier for me to find relationships at work when I have boundaries.
Boundaries are so important, and you're right, because I feel like the older generations, is just boundaries were never something that were really taught, because even as kids, like we see it all the time, like people trying to force kids to hug them when they don't want to be hugged. And it's just like so many boundaries we're taught to not have as young when we're younger, but really boundaries are essential. Lala, I would love to go to you with this question before we move on. What are some things that you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yeah, so I'm pulling up a tweet right now by a friend named Kai, who is a disability advocate and is autistic. I'm gonna spell out their handle and then I'm gonna speak to that. Their handle is PLSCALLMEKY on Twitter. And they tweeted asking how many other autistic folks have been called or told the following when they were a child: you're too smart for your own good, you're an old soul, and examples like that. And I responded, and I was like, literally all of these, named some other examples. I'd be the president when I grow up. I'm a leader, not a follower. I'm mature for my age, years ahead of adults in my life, things like that. And so as an autistic person who's multiply disabled and all of the other things I named, I think something, I'm only 22 years old. Like, I'm very new to this adult stuff. And I think something that I didn't realize at age 18 and 19 was that I wasn't an adult yet, because I was being told from being a mere digit that I was mature and grown and all of these things that I was not. And I took it so literal, and you're 18 in America and you're legally an adult and you can make decisions for yourself. And so yeah, I'll give a content warning for sexual assault. Hopefully not going to get too specific, but want to give that time for folks to do what they need to do. But yeah, so I was assaulted twice, and both times I didn't realize until after, because I'd convinced myself, I'm an adult and I'm making informed decisions. And the first time I wasn't making decisions, I was coerced. And the second time was the same, except it was somebody that had groomed me and was over a decade older than me, and preyed on me for 2 years. And I was like, we've known each other for 2 years. I trust this person. And they did things to my body that I said no to out loud. And then it was to the point where similarly to Tova's story, where I knew what the capacity of my body was, and I had to shut down so I could survive that moment, and just wait until the moment that I was away from them. And I had to completely just break contact with them. And it was hard, because up until the moment where they assaulted me, I thought this person was my friend. And they were also financially abusing me, because I'm polyamorous. So I have another partner that I'm still with and was talking to at the same time. And me and this partner who I live with, we were financially insecure. And so the person that assaulted me was like, you both will never have to worry about money ever, so as long as I'm in your life. And they made so many efforts to isolate me, and it worked. And yeah, it's just upsetting, because not that I necessarily blame the folks that gave me that messaging when I was young, but I do think that messaging was to my detriment, and informed my young adulthood for me to believe that I'm this all-knowing person and it's my responsibility. to make sure I don't get harmed. I don't know if that makes sense to folks or if it sounds like I'm jumping, but I don't know. I feel like there's a bridge there.
Mhm.
And yeah.
That-
Yeah, I feel like that's what I wish I knew as well, was just that, you know, when I was younger, I didn't have to take those things that people said to me and identified with them. I could formulate and make my own, I don't know, have my own understanding of things, and not learning what happened to me after the fact doesn't make it any less valid. Because even now I'm still like, was it assault? Am I just projecting? I'm like, no, it was. So yeah, sorry, I just want to tag that on.
Mhm.
I appreciate everything that you just said, because it's so deep and important, because we really, not just if we're autistic, maybe we're whatever type of child, we're always told we can do, we're, I've been told that old soul thing so many times, that you do believe that you're more mature. You do believe that you are wiser than you think you are. And it's so important to realize, like, when you turn 18, you're the same person you were the day before. There's no magical knowledge that gets embedded into you. And I really empathize with a lot of what you said, because even when we get abused, we don't acknowledge to ourselves we're abused. And then we're still questioning whether it happened because it didn't happen with the way that other people say it should happen. And because we're in that old self, we should have known better. And so I do think that the language that we have towards people in general is so important, and to really empower, not because, you know, they're trying to be empowering when they say that, but they're not really being empowering, because, like you said, that is to our detriment at times. And so to really empower children and people growing up is to acknowledge that we don't know everything, and that it's okay to have safe spaces, where safe people to where we can go to and not feel scared to tell somebody something that happened to us. Because that was one of my things too. As an autistic person, I was too scared to go and get help because I didn't want to get in trouble. I think this really leads us to a good part of our conversation in what are some red flags. So I'll start with you, Tova. What are some red flags that people should look out for?
I was thinking about this actually. I think it's a little bit hard to answer, because a lot of rapists and abusers tend to be like really charming people, especially on the outside. So you think like they could be selling you like love bombing and everything in the beginning, and you're not sure like it's hard to tell what's going to happen. But I was also thinking of control. They like, I feel like abusers look for someone who they want to control. And I was thinking about also with rape, is that rape is about control and it's not about sex. So I would say someone, you know, who's controlling and overly charming, but like, I don't want to say like overly charming and then you shut yourself off from like someone who's actually a nice person who's charming. But yeah, it's hard to tell. But just listen to your gut for the most part. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a great point that it really is hard, because something that is so important to stress is that it could be anybody. Like, any person that you meet could potentially be a great person, or they could be the next abuser type of thing. So listening to your gut and starting to actually have confidence in your decisions and who like you want to be is really important, because if someone's controlling, they're going to try and change who you want to be. And so when you start to feel that sense of push towards something that you don't want, or something that, even if it's just actions, like, it doesn't have to be anything big, it can just be like the way you're dressing or the types of things that you do. It's like little things like that. They're trying to control that. That could be a really big red flag, because that's one tiny thing, and you don't know what that's going to lead to. I'd like to go to you next, Karen, with what are some red flags that you've experienced that people should look out for?
So I think on the charming thing, I think the part about it is when someone's like pushing you too fast. That's the thing that abusers do, is they push you too fast. So if someone's just charming, but they give you your space and they let something develop naturally, then they might be okay. But if they're kind of pushing you, if they're suddenly in love with you, if they're, they're basically love bombing you, like they're kind of trying to bring you into their own personal cult in a way. And that's a red flag. I think the red flag, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I wish I had noticed. One thing is that the relationship did not turn abusive right off the bat. There were some red flags in the beginning, especially the like trying to move along too fast thing. But unfortunately, it really started to turn after she became more disabled. Her chronic illness flared up. And I think what actually happened, part of it was that she hated herself so much, and what she was dealing with is she couldn't deal with the fact that I didn't hate my disability and I didn't hate my life, that I actually accepted my disability and that I found ways to be successful and all this. And even though I was trying to encourage her in those same kind of ways, it was like she couldn't get there. And that made me be very patient, because I was like, okay, this is a person who's going through a grieving process. I've got to be understanding. But at a certain point, when someone is actually dragging you down with them and they're trying to make you hate yourself as much as they hate themselves, that's not healthy. Obviously, that's very toxic. So that's one thing that I would look at. We all have self-esteem issues. I'm not saying that you have to only be with someone who loves themselves, but if they hate themselves and they're trying to drag you down with them, that's a red flag. Also, another thing is looking at control, but sometimes it can be difficult to spot, because as disabled people, especially I would say those of us with physical or some type of support needs, we have been subjected to control before. I wrote a whole essay once about my hair and how at different times people have pressured me to cut it so it'd be easier for others to take care of, and how that is really problematic for me. And that is part of one of the reasons why I intentionally keep my hair long. I have cut it a few times, but besides trimming, but it's always been like my choice to do so, because it's important to my integrity. And it does kind of tend to serve actually as a red flag about people. If they complain about it all the time or something, that's like, okay, that caregiver maybe is not the best. It's a red flag. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of my experience.
No, I think that's so important, because in all types of relationships, especially with caregivers, if they're trying to tell you how you should be in your body to make their life easier, that is toxic. That is a red flag, because that's showing that they don't care what makes you comfortable or how you want to feel or how you want to look. It's
exactly.
And that's definitely a red flag. So thank you for sharing, because again, like you said, disabled people, we do get forced control onto us so often that the ableist society makes it a little bit normalized to where it's just another thing. It's not something that could really stand out. And so I think that's all really important to remember when we're experiencing little things. If a caregiver is making a comment about your hair or about the way that you want to do something, that's definitely some red flags to just acknowledge and register, just to know. Rachel, I would love to go to you next with, in your experience, what have been some red flags that you've seen?
In my experience, when people have a conflict and then they try to move on, I value people who try to repair with me, and different people repair in different ways. Some people need to disappear for a bit, come back. Some people need intentional time together. And the thing is, I will give my partner what they need to my capacity. But if they don't give me back the kind of repair I need, then all they want is to be repaired enough for them. They don't care how I'm doing. And that's a big part. And the other part is, Lala, gaslighting at any age is so real. It's real in the medical industry on a level that I think we would need a whole separate talk about, actually. Yeah, let's sing later. But like in relationships, being like people acting like you're off yourself, off your capacity, off your brain, whatever, when you know they're harming you on some level, that's really real. And like I had a conversation with somebody recently saying, this person you're still connected to gaslit me for 6 months after violating my consent sexually, and then said a lot of other harmful things and made it look like I was the jerk who was hurting their partner. And it's like, that's not really fair to say to somebody who you assaulted. But since you didn't admit to that, then I looked like the asshole. And you leave out the thing that you did. So I think that that's a really important thing, because I knew that no one was listening to me, but I didn't really click for me until later, like how big a problem it was that people were actively disregarding my experience. Like there's a big difference between I don't understand where you're coming from and I don't care.
Yeah, you're right.
Another one is this people randomly punching walls and it makes you scared. I had a friend punch a wall because he was angry and needed to punch something that was inanimate. And I was like, I'm not scared. I feel nothing. This is your wall. You pay for it. When somebody punched a wall that it was in my home that I paid for, that they didn't pay for, suddenly it changed the whole concept. And I was scared. And I was like, your body will tell you, and whatever it is that's making you afraid, you got to figure out what that is. You might not know right away, but you're going to want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I realized that.
Oh, don't apologize at all. Like all of this stuff, if anything comes to mind, you guys want to blurt out, please do, because it's so important that we just talk about it. And yeah, I've always heard that like something that really changed my perspective on things was like if somebody is punching something or they're breaking something in front of you, that's them kind of directing that energy. They're either trying to intimidate you or they want to hit you, one of the two, and neither one of those are good. That's
I've had friends do that in a way that felt very calm and controlled, and like my life hurts right now, so I'm gonna calmly do something about it away from you. And I was like, okay, I actually see how this can be done in a way that isn't violent towards me, but it is takes such a higher level of understanding of your own self and your body in relation to other people. And most people aren't going to do that. Most people, if they're just popping off, will be creating exactly what you said, this like state of living in violence.
Yeah. And really it's like you said, your body's going to tell you, and listening to your body is the most important thing. If it's telling you there's something to be scared of, then don't gaslight yourself and try to figure out in that moment what it is. Lala, I would love to go to you with any red flags or anything that you have experienced that you would like to share with that.
Yeah, I first want to just thank everybody for what they've shared so far, because it's really like informing what I'm about to say. But yeah, I'm just noticing so many patterns about like control and autonomy and like what safety looks like and things like that. And I think that's really where we're able to recognize when abuse is happening, or at least when we're being harmed, is if we're able to go, this person is trying to either control me or the situation or our circumstance. They're denying me autonomy, or I feel harmed by what they're doing or what they're not doing. Like being able to name these things is super important. And so what I will offer is like a red flag is when folks don't let you name these things. I think if you're saying to someone like you're controlling the situation, and rather than being curious and trying to understand where you're coming from, they're immediately defensive or immediately trying to shift blame. That can be a big red flag. And I will say, with all the examples we're giving, you know, it's obviously not like going to be a one-to-one experience. All manifestations of abuse can be unique, and outside of our imagination if we haven't experienced it. So, but I will say that that is a big thing when someone is not willing to attempt to get on the same page. Like there's not even the attempt. That's a very big sign that this person is not someone who wants you to have any sense of control or autonomy or a sense of mutuality. And yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to my previous point, if that's okay too. Because someone commented about adultifying. I don't know if I'll be able to find that. I'm like scrolling back to it. Yeah, I don't know. There's too many comments at this point. But the adultification of children and young people is very frustrating, especially as someone who has lived through it. And without, getting too deep into it, I was also parentified at a young age, being a child of divorced parents and of a parent that remarried. And I was an only child, but as my other parent remarried, I became a sibling of 4 other kids, and quickly my parent had children with this person, and I had 2 new siblings, and then I became my own parent, and I became the parent of 6 other kids. And so I never had time to explore really what being a child was and what being cared for looked like. And so into my adulthood, I'm still curious about that. And I'm still questioning, what does safety look like and how can I welcome safety? Because sometimes safety feels scary because it's unfamiliar. And so all of that said, again, to name like a big red flag is just if someone is being disencouraging, I don't know if that's even a real word, but not encouraging the opportunity and not encouraging safety in general, not even the opportunity to feel safe, but literally safety, like centering safety. If people are decentering safety, that is like one of the biggest red flags. If you are saying, even if you're not saying literally, I'm not safe or I'm not feeling safe, but you're naming that in other language and they're taking that away from you, denying that, or shifting that into conflict or escalating, like all of those things, those are really big red flags that I think I have taken and allowed blame to be shifted on me and turned into like internalized conflict and things like that. So I think just being able to notice those things. And I know this isn't really answering the question, but also maybe finding people who you do feel safe, like naming these things with, you can get affirmation of, is this a red flag? Because sometimes you don't know, you need an outside perspective. So yeah.
Like, I love that you said finding someone that you feel safe with naming things, because as someone who's autistic, sometimes I don't know if my emotions are too much and stuff. So I do have actually autistic friends who I message and I'm like, hey, do you have some time? Because I need to know if I'm actually like, am I feeling justified or am I actually just projecting? Like, and I'll tell them the situation and they'll tell me straight up if I am just a little too emotional, or they'll be like, no, actually justified to feel the way you feel and don't tell yourself otherwise, because we're so often gaslighting ourselves. That's what society makes us do. I'm going to stop talking in case you have anything more you want to share.
Oh yeah, sorry, no worries. I just wanted to add another thing because, again, not to gaslight anybody or myself, but there can be moments where we think we see a red flag that isn't a red flag. We just didn't like the thing or we read it the wrong way. Sometimes we receive things wrong. So I guess that was kind of my point too, is like, if you're naming red flags and the person won't explore them with you, that's an even bigger red flag. But yeah, I think running things by other people can be helpful because sometimes our perspective can be off. Maybe we're having an off day. I know days where if I've had a meltdown or I'm like suppressing anxiety, which is like 2 ends of the spectrum, like of experiencing anxiety, like I'm not going to receive anything positively. Everything's going to be a trigger. So that's just me being real about like what I know, how my body and my mind experiences things. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that made sense, but thank you for letting me name that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to someone who also really, if I am so overwhelmed with so many things, it might have absolutely nothing to do with the person, but they might have hit me a little too sensitive in some words. Maybe I perceive tone when it's not there, because it's so hard in text. And it's like, when I think that's one of the most important things about being trauma informed, though, is because when you're in these exchanges with people and you know that you had the best of intentions and maybe they didn't take it a certain way, you can step back and be like, how did I come off that might have triggered you in a way? Because we all live with triggers. We all have experiences in life that it wasn't a abusive relationship, but maybe it was a toxic friendship, which is abusive relationship, but that's besides the point. It's like there's so many different times in life where sometimes you're right, we might misread tone, we might project feelings from other situations, and that safe person is going to say, I know you were hurt in the past, I promise this is not that time, and I love you, I appreciate you, and that's a bonding moment. But if somebody isn't willing to realize when you might be in a PTSD episode, when you might be in a meltdown, when you might be overwhelmed, when you might be overstimulated, those definitely are red flags too, that are really important, that we are taught as disabled people to embrace, to accept, not embrace, but to just accept it, because that's just part of life. And with turning towards ableism, I would love to bring up this question is, how do you think ableism contributes to intimate partner violence, gender violence, and just violence towards the disabled in general? I will start with you, Tova.
Sorry, it took me a while to hit unmute. So I was thinking, what came up for me was internalized ableism as I go back to what I was talking about earlier. Not realizing my worth made me do things that I wouldn't have done if I had more respect for myself and for my body. I definitely viewed myself as lesser than because of my disability. And I spent like a lot of time trying not to look disabled or come across as disabled. So I think that really, that was the biggest thing for me, I found, was my internalized ableism around the whole thing and my lack of worth for myself. And I think if I had that, things might have been different.
Mm-hmm. That's so on point, because it's wild to think, like, in my experience too, internalized ableism told me that at least I have someone around me, at least I'm in a relationship, at least they're there, because that's better than being alone, apparently. And it wasn't better than being alone, but because I was born disabled in an ableist society, I thought I didn't deserve to actually be with somebody that respected my disabled identity. And so it's been like a complete 180 being with my husband now, who like never flinches when we have to go to a doctor. He rushes me to the hospital when we need. And it's like, I used to have people shout at me that my pain was in my head. And so I thought I used to deserve that just because I was disabled. But you're right. It's like the internalized ableism sets us up for so much.
Yeah, I was thinking, just to continue a bit, it happened in the same way, like with my internalized fat phobia too of myself. So like I was looking at my body and I was like, this person's only abusing me now because of how I look, because I look weaker than, because I'm not like, I was thinking like, because this was an internet type of thing, right? Or like meeting someone on the internet and not knowing them in advance or whatever. But then like, I was like, I can't meet people out in public because people don't, like the way I look, or like I look bad. So people must be, so this is why I had to do this. This is why I'm a bad person. yeah, so that all like really contributed to what happened. Yeah.
Mhm. And I saw someone in the chat said that internalized ableism is really hard to really get over. And it really is, because no matter how long you've been disabled, if it's been from birth or if it's been later in life, you've always been told disability is inferior. You've always been told it's not something you want to be. And so that's why spaces like this is so important, because we can come together and celebrate the fact that there's power in all of those identities, and that we don't deserve to ever feel like there isn't, that we shouldn't be who we are. Karen, I would love to go to you next with, how do you think ableism has contributed to just violence towards disabled in general?
Sure. So there's kind of three pieces, but the first two will be short, I promise. So I agree about internalized ableism. I think that that really kept me in the relationship, because I was like, well, I can't really do any better than this. And then eventually I really had to come to the realization, you know what? I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than have to go through this. And I feel that, you know, I still struggle. I would say I definitely feel I've regained a lot of the self-esteem that I lost, but I do feel very hesitant about relationships still, because I just feel like it would be risky. I feel like, you know, it'll be hard to find somebody who accepts me and things like that. And so I would say that that does still very much affect me to this day, even though I've healed in a lot of ways. Another aspect is systemic ableism. So the ways that, especially for, I think, people financially, in my case, I was the one who was being financially exploited. But again, you know, it's one of the things, like when I used to have money, I always wanted to help people, you know, so it was kind of hard to let go of that. And then it kind of flipped the other way for me. So now I do end up needing, you know, Medicaid to pay for my home care and things like that. And so now I see how a lot of people end up trapped in abusive relationships for that reason, because they couldn't financially survive without somebody, which is so scary, you know? So there's that. And then the other thing is sometimes just having abuse recognized. So I unfortunately had married this woman, and so we had to get legally divorced. And when I talked to my attorney, I said, look, I said, this is an abusive relationship. There were, you know, I was still really getting a handle on that, but I explained some of the things that she did. And a couple of things that I said were that she had threatened to break my computer and my phone. And also that she had, when she had been helping me sometimes in the evening, she would threaten to leave me on the toilet. And those were examples that I gave. And she's like, well, that's terrible. She's like, and the reason I was trying to prove abuse was because it would get her out of the home quicker, instead of basically having to evict her or get the settlement. Okay. Because I was scared to be alone with her. I was scared to be alone in the house with her when my caregivers weren't there. And but she was like, they won't agree that that's abuse. And I'm like, but it is. Like, can't you see why I don't feel safe? And I didn't feel even supported by my own attorney. And what it actually took was literally a few days after that conversation, I got my credit card bill. I had changed my credit card number because she had used it in the past. I got a new card. I put it in my backpack on the back of my wheelchair, where she should have never been near it, right? Well, somehow she had gotten hold of that card, and she had charged her health insurance premiums on it. $1,200 on my credit card, right? In my name only. I immediately called her, and that was what got her out. But it's like, that's what it took, you know, it was like that level of abuse, but the abuse that was disability specific, it was like they couldn't understand how those things were more scary for me because of my physical limitations. So that's some example, just a few examples of ableism and how it contributes to abuse. And I could also go into the whole caregivers thing too. Like, it's so hard to find caregivers, and those sometimes you end up hiring people that you're not 100% sure about, and then they turn out to, you know, my situation was really over the top, actually being attacked, but a lot of people had people steal from them and things like that. So yeah, all right, that's a lot. That's a bunch of reasons, and there's a lot more, but you know, that gives you some examples.
And there's way too many examples and reasons to even discuss. It's so much. Sadly, it's so much, but it's so heartbreaking to just think about the amount of disabled people who are in fear of their lives, and the law tells them that it doesn't count as
Yeah.
abuse.
Yeah,
But-
every close friend with a disability I've ever had has been abused in some way. Every single one.
And that's a real sad illustration of how the world views disabled people as disposable and inferior. And that's why disability pride's so important, because we don't deserve any of that. Like, it always makes me so upset to hear people say that disability doesn't contribute anything to the world, when like the most monumental advances and the most historical figures all were shaped by disability. But I digress. I would love to go to you, Rachel, next, to hear your thoughts on how ableism really shapes violence towards disabled people.
I think ableism makes it very challenging for me to make friendships or relationships of any kind, including having useful relationships with my family. And one of the things about abusive relationships, especially about abusive intimate partners, is it's easier to do if the person's isolated. And it's not impossible if they have people, but it's easier. So that's one big part of that. But the other part is like, I lost friends because they were just burnt out off of caring for someone else and didn't have any internal boundaries to be like, I don't need to be your caregiver. I can just be your friend. Because I was like, you're not my doctor. I'm not paying you money. Could you not? But like, I lost so many friends that way because they were just like, they'd get frustrated if I gave me advice and I didn't take it or something. And it was this perception that like they didn't know how to be with somebody whose life was challenging, which is, I can't even break that down. That hurts my brain. But like, there are people in this world who just want friendships that only go so far. And so someone whose daily life is challenging, they treat my daily life like a crisis, whereas there are crises, but they are different, you know? And so having people who are there for you make it a lot easier to have support. Even if you do find yourself in an abusive situation, then you have support for getting out and being so isolated as a disabled person. It also put me in a situation where like one of the people who was abusive towards me was one of the people who had treated me the best of anyone I ever knew about my disability. And that, you know, they have to have a hook. Abusers have to have a hook. That was the hook. And I needed it. Like I needed water, but I didn't know how to get it anywhere else. And I needed the support, and I needed someone who would show up and go to the doctor with me. And I don't. So yeah, that's how I think ableism contributes. Also, like systemic ableism as systemic oppression, just at the doctor's office. Me reporting them for discrimination when I cannot be seen by any physical medicine doctor at Stanford, and them calling me up to say, you aren't being discriminated against. I'm like, people don't perceive treating disabled people poorly as discrimination because they think it's right. And that's the part that's really terrible, is that they don't actually think it's wrong to treat us badly. I think it's wrong, and I think people like that need to leave my sphere of reality. But those are big red flags if they treat you like you don't belong to the world. I think that's it I gotta say.
Yeah, I had something really on point to respond back with, and it just slipped my mind. But really though, it's like the society does think that it's okay to treat us bad, because they think as long as they're not intending to discriminate against us, as long as they're not intending to abuse us.
Well, that's not what discrimination is. Your intent doesn't mean that you're discriminating or not discriminating. Am I being treated worse for being disabled? Am I being completely denied services just because I have a chronic illness? it doesn't matter. Like people's perception of what oppression and discrimination is all like somebody had an evil thought and then they threw it at someone else. But that's not the stuff that actually hurts me. I mean, that also exists, but like the way that we are harmed and the systems that are preventing us from living the lives we can live, that's the fuck messed up shit. Oh man, I almost made it.
No, and you're right, because it's the impact. It doesn't matter what someone's intention is ever, because it never does. It's this, you don't have to intend to discriminate. You don't have to intend to hurt. You don't have to intend to do anything harmful to do something harmful. And that's one of the biggest red flags of all, I think, is when you tell somebody that they're doing something harmful. And if they say, no, I'm not, because I didn't mean to, like, it doesn't matter what it is. If you didn't mean to do something, say, I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing that up. That's the best response ever to something that you didn't mean to do. I would love to go to you next, Lala, with how do you think ableism has really shaped the violence towards disabled people?
Yeah, again, I appreciate all of these answers. I think one of the main things is like folks have mentioned desirability and like disposability, internalized ableism and systemic ableism, and these things are like inherently interconnected, even when it seems like there's like standalone instances. Like the reason internalized ableism exists is because of the systems that support the messaging and the messaging that supports the systems that disabled people are disposable, that disabled people are not desirable, that we don't contribute, and that we aren't whole people. So I think it's really important to acknowledge like just how inherently intertwined all of these, manifestations of ableism are, because I feel like a lot of the time when I'm trying to unpack and I don't know, dismantle my internalized ableism, I act like it's this like individual like thing. And that's what systems want you to think. They want you to think it's your fault that you are dealing with this, and not that it's their fault, that they are the root, that the system and the ableist society is the root of the issue. So that being said, like as someone who survived like intimate partner violence and familial abuse and neglect and medical abuse and neglect and gaslighting and all of the things, as a survivor and as a disabled person, I feel like one of the most prominent things, again, as I mentioned earlier, I feel like I'm in this perpetual survival state. One of the most prominent things is just trying to recognize, I don't know, where is this all coming from, and what is it contributing to? And again, like I said, at the end of the day, ableism takes roots in systems that intend to dispose of, exploit, like disappear disabled people and other targeted marginalized groups. Ableism and racism overlaps, like not even overlaps just as in like people who are racialized and people who are disabled experience both, but literally the roots of both systems have historical roots. And if we want to talk about psychiatry and we want to talk about policing, those things take similar roots. So I feel like something that is forgotten is disabled people surviving violence is not just disabled people surviving violence. There is historical political roots in every single individual manifestation of this abuse, and there are systems and structures that sustain and support this abuse to continue, and interpersonal violence also supports and sustains these systems, so it's a cycle that pours back into each other. I think on that there.
You are so on point. It's a cycle that's so deeply rooted in literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years of generational cultures that continue to allow it to be deeply rooted. It's like one of the world's longest generational curses. And to be able to unsubscribe and dismantle the ableist society. It's to be able to understand the collectiveness of everything, because I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can actually do to end cycles of abuse and oppression, is to become the collective together and to know you're not alone, you're not isolated. And because the isolation is what the abuser wants, whether it's a personal relationship or it's the ableist society. Maybe it's the medical system, because the medical system doesn't want patients to band together to talk about their experiences, to build communities that is like embracing the shared identity of disability. I can't even tell you the amount of comments I get on my own pages of people trying to say that we shouldn't create identities, we shouldn't be proud of our disabilities, we shouldn't wear them, we shouldn't put them in our bios, we shouldn't talk about them. It's like having that pride in these communities is what can end the cycles of oppression, because we can talk about things like this. We can actually come together and find that even though we felt so alone in our lived experiences, there's at least 5 people in this room who have experienced similar types of experiences where we actually were never alone in them. And I think that's so powerful with our community. And that leads us to, how can we actually support a loved one or a peer, or just somebody that we notice might be experiencing violence? Tova, we'll start with you.
Always starting with me. I'm like, okay, how do we support a loved one? Listen, and be available and provide a safe space. I think those are the best things that we can do for a loved one. It's because you can't tell them, like, you don't want to tell them what to do. Obviously, we just want to be there for them and give them the space that they need.
Yeah, I think it is important to make sure that they know that there's a space that they can come to, because sometimes family might feel very hostile because they don't support your choice in being with someone because they know it's abusive, but then you feel like you can't go to that family when you start to realize it might be abusive, because you don't want to be wrong. You can't admit they were right. And so it's being that safe place that makes someone not feel judged for their decisions, that makes them know that you're rooting them on and you'll be there whatever happens, and just making them not feel guilty about doing what they're doing, so they have that safe place to come to. I think that's such a great point. Karen, I would love to go to you next with, how can we best support somebody?
So I guess, so a couple pieces. First of all, if you're supporting somebody who is in an abusive situation and maybe they don't fully recognize it, or they're just starting to recognize it, I had 2 friends who really helped me during that time. One of them had previously been in an abusive marriage, and really what she did is that we would talk a lot, like on Skype, on Zoom, and she would hear things. We didn't have Zoom at the time, but it was similar. It was like we would talk about things, and she would sometimes overhear things that my ex would say. And then later she would say, that's a lot like something that my ex-husband used to say to me. Like, she would just point things out, and she kind of helped me gradually realize it. And she was also a little bit of a tough love kind of person. So she kind of did at a certain point, was like, look, this relationship is really toxic. Like, she didn't push me out of it because she knew that that wasn't something that, she could do, having been there herself, but she did kind of really just say it to me. The other friend was just so kind, just always supporting me, affirming me, just like loving and just there whenever I needed her. And we didn't even talk about it all that much at the time, but just having her there and feeling her unconditional love and support made a big difference in my life. My father was a mixed bag, because he felt that the situation was bad, but he was a little bit afraid that if he pushed me too hard on it, that he would actually think that I thought that he didn't like her because she was a woman, that he was being homophobic, but it wasn't that at all. And he said it to me repeatedly. He's like, no, it wasn't because she was a woman, it's because she treated you badly. Like, and you know, I did know that, but unfortunately, he also kind of is someone who's like, he doesn't really blame me for getting into the relationship, but he still kind of holds it against me that I stayed so long. He doesn't really understand how intense abuse can be and how hard it is to get out of it. You know, and so he blames me for like the fact that my financial situation was ruined and things like that because I didn't get out sooner. And that's hard to live with. And I think on that note, I would say one thing that you can do is when a person is ready to leave, help them, because that is the worst time. It is statistically the most dangerous time when if the intimate partner is going to be violent, that's the time that they're most likely to do it, to actually try to take your life, to seriously harm you, or to act out and do other things like stealing things, card fraud, in my case, that type of stuff. So I think just literally willing to physically be there for the person, go stay with them. If the abusive partner is moving out, if they're moving out, help them pack their stuff and go. Give them a place to stay that's far away too, and that the abuser can't just show up, you know, like move them a couple hours away, even if it's just temporarily, if that's at all possible. If they have to be local because of work or something, make sure they don't know where they are, you know, that type of thing, just for safety. You know, in my case, having someone to stay there, you know, would have been helpful with me. So those are my best suggestions for how to support somebody.
Thank you so much. And so many of those can honestly help to save a life. It goes so much beyond support. And it's truly, if somebody feels like there was something you could have done to prevent further harm from happening to yourself, then remind yourself that's a privilege, that they never had to be in the position to know that that was impossible. And I'm sorry that you have to experience that, but that's just a privilege that they'll never know about. Rachel, we'll go to you next for how can we support somebody?
I think that a lot of us who are gaslit, like, do actually try to tell people what's going on. And I do remember telling some people who were more removed from the experience what had happened. And I think that someone like validating my side, especially when I am right, doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes I'm wrong, but in the times when I'm right, is very helpful to have someone be like, yo, this is not okay. Because there was that sexual assault incident. I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize how bad it was until I told a friend a year later, and they got mad. They were like mad. And I was like, oh, I was mad, but nobody else seemed to think that made sense. And so that's like super helpful. I had a friend who told me years after I had been in one of those relationships that they saw that I was afraid of this person when they were like being close with them. And I don't know how I would have reacted to it. I don't know if I would have been defensive, but I almost wish they had told me, because I didn't understand that until I left. And then this person became stalkerish and all this stuff. It was so bad after I left. But like, I didn't know that I looked scared, because I didn't know that I could have relationships that worked. So I didn't know that looked wrong. And it was like, it wasn't right how I was treated. But yeah, giving someone a safe space, like when people were hunting me down at my job, it was nice to be in a random other city. And like, I want people to only give what they can, like seriously, with boundaries, because I've been that person for someone else, and I was like, I love you. I can see you and hang out with you at your place that you're getting, that he doesn't know where it is, but I cannot be your primary person to live with. And that was what I could give. And it's like, if you give someone with boundaries, then they know I can rely on you. But if you don't have boundaries and you get resentful, then they can't rely on you. So that's my thought.
That's a very important thing to remember, is that setting your own boundaries, because sometimes you have to also remember your own mental care. You can't pour from an empty cup, as cliche as that is. And really, it's making sure that you voice how you can support somebody is great, because then there won't be any miscommunications. There won't be any resentments if you didn't show up in a way that somebody was expecting, because it's just so much. So I think you're really on point with naming boundaries and how you can support somebody and being there to support them, even if it's being that listening ear, the person to say, yeah, that is really messed up. I'm sorry you went through that, because there's so much to be said for just knowing what we went through was fucked up. Excuse my language. Lala, we will go to you next. How can we support a loved one? What are some ways?
Yeah. So content warning, I'm going to mention suicidal ideation, but not in depth or specifics. But I speak to suicidality a lot as someone who identifies as being a survivor of chronic suicidality as a result of complex trauma, etc. And so I have a little quote where I said basically that being suicidal signifies that there are things that one is navigating worse than death. And also that suicidal people's goal is not necessarily to die, but to rid of the suffering that they are experiencing. And so not to use that as an analogy, but more of just like mirroring how we survive crises, surviving abuse and staying, similarly to having suicidal ideation. There's either a sense of deserving what you're experiencing, or a sense of, I don't know how to escape this, so why would I try? Or I don't have the tools to escape this, so I can't try. And so using those examples, I think the best thing is just to be present and willing to help strategize, to be available to offer ideas, but also recognizing and respecting autonomy and consent boundaries, because I think so often when we see people surviving these crises, we just want to snatch them out of it, and it's not that simple. And also when you do that and you deny someone that autonomy, they're going to see you as a harm doer more likely than not, because they're not able to see the situation outside looking in. As a survivor, I can acknowledge that. And I also think that's a fair response. Someone trying to be your savior when you're experiencing abuse is not welcoming. What is welcoming is someone meeting you where you're at and seeking to understand what that looks like, so they can authentically and effectively do that, instead of just deciding themselves what that looks like for you. So that would be my biggest tip, is to understand these things and then move accordingly. Don't try to be someone's savior. Don't act like you are in charge of them, or that you know what's best for them, because they are the ones surviving the situation. Yeah.
Such great points. And Tova, I see that you unmuted yourself, so I want to give you a chance to respond if you did want to. Okay, I just wanted to see. I love that you brought up to not go into a situation trying to be someone's savior, because that is such a important thing, because you want to help somebody, so it can be really easy to step over that line. But especially if somebody isn't ready to be helped, if they're not ready to acknowledge the situation they're in, if they're still processing, it takes a lot of time to process a lot of hard things. And so the last thing that we need in that time is someone trying to save us, and we don't even know how we can save ourselves. And so it's very important to just be that, again, that safe space. And I want to thank you all so much for helping us create this safe space to where we can discuss this. And I know it's been really hard to relive some of these moments, and it means so much. And so for the last few minutes, we have about 5 minutes remaining. I would love to celebrate you all and give you a chance to promote yourself and let us know how we can support you. So Karen, your mic is unmuted, so I will go with you first and we will go around the line. Where can we find you and how can we support you?
Sure. So I have 2 websites. I am a travel blogger, not much lately due to the pandemic. I'm still trying to avoid getting COVID. But I do travel occasionally. And that website is freewheelandtravel.org. And my Twitter handle is freewheelandme with no G. And then my other project, my main project now is the Ability Toolbox. It is at Ability Toolbox on Twitter. And the website is theabilitytoolbox.com. I am always looking for writers. I do have paid opportunities if you would like to be paid to write, or if you would like to donate your writing, your article to help the website grow. I always appreciate that. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch with me via either of those means if you would like to chat. We also are on Instagram for Ability Toolbox. I believe it's the Ability Toolbox. So that's another way you can reach me there.
Awesome. Thank you. Tova, we'll go to you next. Where can we find you and how can we support you?
I'm mostly on Instagram, so my tag there is at Tova's Fine. So it's like my first name with an S in the middle and my last name. I sell merch there of the art that I make. So that's one way to support. I have a website and I'm on Twitter and I'm on all of the social medias. So, but you'll be able to find me on Instagram and you can find my merch site and everything all on there.
Awesome. Thank you. Rachel, where can we find you and how can we support you?
Hi, I'm on Instagram at r_Ungerer, UNGERER. I wrote it down. And then I own my name on the website, internet, so it's rachelungerer.com, which is cool. But I sell my paintings, and if you happen to be in the San Francisco Bay Area, I have art shows there too. And some of them are about disability, some of them are about kink, some of them are about queerness. Usually they're actually about all 3, but I'm sneaking that in there. And I'm doing a talk with Extreme Restraints on kink and disability, and that'll be posted in both of those places at some point, though it's a little sticky because it is at a kink sex store, so not for work, but definitely for inclusion. So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Awesome. Good luck. I can't wait to hear and see how it all goes for you. Lala, where can we find you and how can we support you?
So I'm dropping all of my links in the chat. I am most active on my Instagram stories, but I do post on my feed every now and then. I'm also active on Twitter. I'm on an unofficial hiatus on Twitch because I'm currently doing a contract gig. But when I'm not working, I do Twitch. I play mostly video games. Sometimes I do art streams, and 99% of the time I'm talking about anti-capitalism. And then I also have my Linktree. And my Linktree is where you can find all of my updated links. So if anything changes or if I have something coming up. And I also am facilitating these virtual workshops on the topic of thrivation. That's a word I created based on the word thrive. So basically means the opposite of oppression and what it looks like to achieve liberation in the process of getting there. And so that is also what these workshops are about. I technically have one coming up on Sunday, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to push that because I'm getting very burnt out. I've had a busy week. But yeah, so whenever I have other things coming up, it will be on my socials or in the Linktree. Thank you.
Awesome. And I love that thrivation. We should definitely make that a thing because that sounds awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us, for having this amazing talk. And next month, we'll be back for Diversability Unplugged, Disability in Parenting. We'll have Nitty be moderating that, and it's her first one. I'm so excited for her. And thank you, Interpreter Now. I hope everyone has a great night. Bye-bye.